The papacy. Spiritual Egypt is atheism. Spiritual Babylon is the papacy. So in 1798, back to Daniel 11:40, in 1798, atheistic France would war against the papacy. In 1798, atheistic France would war against the papacy. And on page 45, you have Great Controversy 382, which goes along with the scripture of Revelation 17 and shows that spirit of prophecy cosigns that the woman Babylon, the great harlot, is indeed the papacy. Do we have a fulfillment of that in history? Did atheistic France wage war against the papacy? What happened in 1798 between atheistic France and the papacy? What transpired? Taken captive, and what was inflicted on the papacy? Simple answer. Deadly wound was inflicted. So verse 40 begins with the infliction of the deadly wound. Let's simplify it. Keep your mind in simple terms, and you'll be able to build this very clear. In 1798, the deadly wound was inflicted. What we're going to see now is the rest of the chapter begins to show how the deadly wound is healed. It starts with the infliction of the wound, and then now how it's healed. One thing that we need to understand, and we're on page 45 of your notes, one thing that we need to understand is that when the papacy received its deadly wound, now let's pause for a minute. What is the papacy? It's two powers, religious and civil, or church and state, that has come together. The Great Transgression. All right, the Great Transgression the Bible talks about. Church and state combination. When it received its deadly wound, what part of it ceased?
Political power.
The political power. Civil power is broken, but it continued as a church. It continued as a church. And we read yesterday that all she's waiting for is vantage ground. All she's waiting for is to get that civil power back. And what's going to happen as soon as she gets it? Persecution. And so this is the history that leads to the close of probation that it's dealing with here. That's Great Controversy, page 58, and I'll read it for a point in time. It says, "And let it be remembered that it is the boast of Rome that she never changes. The principles of Gregory the Seventh and Innocent the Third are still the principles of the Roman Catholic Church. And had she but the power, had she but that civil power, she would put them in practice with as much vigor now as in past centuries. Protestants little know what they are doing when they propose to accept the aid of Rome in the work of Sunday exaltation. While they are bent upon the accomplishment of their purpose, Rome is aiming to reestablish her power. Not her church power, she has it. She's claiming to reestablish the civil power, it says, to recover her lost supremacy. Let the principles once be established in the United States that the church may employ or control the power of the state, that religious observances may be enforced by secular laws. In short, that the authority of church and state is to dominate the conscience, and the triumph of Rome in this country is assured." All right, so this is what we're now getting to, the principles of how she receives the healing of her deadly wound. And I want to make the statement, and for many of us it's clear, but we hear so many winds of doctrine. We hear so many things. When you understand Daniel 11:40 through 45, it blows out of the water the fact that, or I should say the statement that the deadly wound was healed in 1929 with the pact with Mussolini. No. She was given maybe 700 acres of domination there in Vatican, in the seven-hilled city. That's what she is now. But she wants world supremacy. That does not happen until the third geographical obstacle is overcome. Now, if we look at the principles upon the testimony of two, and we've established that before, and we look upon the principle of historical repetition, it establishes the fact that we just said. Remember, pagan Rome had to overcome three geographical obstacles: the south, the east, the pleasant land, and then it came into power. Papal Rome had to overcome three geographical obstacles: the Herald, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. When it happened, 538 came into power. Deadly wound is inflicted. In order for it to come into power again upon the testimony of two and historical repetition, what must she overcome again? Three geographical powers. All right, now let's turn back to Daniel 11:40. I'm sure we're all up to speed now. No problems. Daniel 11, verse 40. And again, as repetition is always good, and at the time of the end, in 1798, shall the king of the south, atheistic France, push or war against the king of the north, the papacy, and he received his deadly wound. Then it says, and the king of the north, which we've defined as the papacy, shall come against him. Who's the him now? Who's the him? Well, the king of the north comes against him. All right, we're looking at the king of the south now. So reading the rest of the verse, and the king of the north shall come against him, the king of the south, like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Just with a very simple reading of the verse, you can tell that retaliation is transpiring. Now, if we look in history, did the papacy ever have a retaliation against atheistic France? Not literally. All right, and we know it's not literally because we're applying these things in what way? The spiritual way. All right, so there was never a literal retaliation against literal atheistic France. But notice what transpires. Just as there was a change of heads with the king of the north and the king of the south, or changing of crowns, now the king of the south is changing a crown. Still the king of the south, still represents atheism. But what happens here? If you look in the book here, if you look in your notes, I should say, and turn to page 46. Turn to page 46. We've already established atheistic France. We've already looked in Daniel chapter 11. And if you read, Revelation chapter 11. If you look in Revelation chapter 11, in your notes here, it's verses 9 through 13. And maybe we should read it together. 9 through 13, Revelation chapter 11. We've already established in verse 8 that spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, the atheistic France. This is the time period of the French Revolution. And notice what happens. Verses 9 through 13. It says, and they, the people and the kindreds and the tongues of the nations, shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwell on the earth. And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, come up hither. And they ascended up into heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And we'll stop there. When Daniel in Revelation, Uriah Smith quotes these verses, and he's dealing with these verses in page 535 to 537, he gives us the history of what transpired. And notice what happens. On page 46, it says the triumphing of the wicked is short. So was it in France. For their war on the Bible and Christianity well nigh swallowed them all up. They set out to destroy Christ's two witnesses, but they filled France with blood and terror, so that they were horror-struck at the result of their own wicked deeds, and were soon glad to remove their impious hands from the Bible. In 1793, a decree passed the French Assembly suppressing the Bible. Just 3 years after, a resolution was introduced into the Assembly superseding the decree and giving toleration to the Scriptures. Nothing but the appalling results of the rejection of the Bible could have induced France to take her hands off these witnesses. And we'll stop there. What was happening is the revolution that caused liberty in France was short. It was short-lived. And France, in a sense, lost her power because the government or assembly behind her was broken. And atheism continued as a philosophy, but there was no voice behind it anymore. There was no voice. And so the philosophy of atheism continued to go throughout the world looking for a government, looking for a government. But before we understand this government, let's look at the history of France. Two things for atheism, two principles, very clear principles. Atheism comes in by the aid or by the use of revolution. Atheism comes into power by the use of revolution. These are in your notes there. And the second thing is that atheism comes in by the use of revolution in the countries that were supported or controlled by the papal power. All right? Now look what happened. It says in the middle of your page there, in the middle of your page, after going over what we just did, it says in 1917, atheism once again gained control of a government. by the